Okay, this is my demo for the PA3 and PA4 projects, the converter and the viewer. So I'm going to talk through some of the code, talk through some of the points in the PDFs, and demo the converter running and the models showing up in the game engine viewer. So here I have the converter code open. So after the existing code where the vertex and trilist data is gotten into the arrays or into the vectors, I essentially handle all of the input arguments here. I delete any existing bin and blow files. This assert statement essentially checks to make sure that there is both an input file parameter and an output file name specified. So the output file I get here, and then I copy over the vertex data into an array from the vector just to make sure I have the most condensed version of the data to copy over to a file. So here I get the file names, I get the input file name, and I'm just going to use that as a unique identifier, and I create the .bin and .blo file names as strings to use. I open up those specified the bin files here, and I write the data first for the vertex data and then for the trilist data down here into the two specified bin files, and then I create these string commands for vodka, the vodka program, to convert the bin files into .blo files. This is what it would look like hard-coded, but here I run the same thing based on this concatenated string commands above. And then here I check to make sure that, well, there's two options. Either the textures can be included in the final package, or they can be exported separately. So here I just check to make sure that there's enough arguments, and that the third argument is this include texture argument. And if that is one of the arguments passed in the command line, then I'll check to make sure that there are more arguments after it, because if include texture is added, then there needs to be TJ file name specified. And then here's a for loop that for any amount of TJ file name specified, it'll get those file paths, and then it'll call vodka on those TJ files to convert them into .blo files as well. And then this is the concatenated system command, and then I'll run it right here. So yeah, I made my converter to be able to accept any number of TGA file names specified. And then afterwards, I'll concatenate the system command to run liu, and this will package all of the .blo files that exist together into a single SPU. And then I'll run that right here, and then I'll delete any intermediate files. So just making sure I hit everything. I have the standalone converter. I export at least 5 models, which I'll show in a second, and then I'll also show them. I'll also show copying over the final SPU packages into the game engine viewer and running the loading the models and the data and showing them on the screen there in a second. So here I have my PA3, and one thing to note is that my original PA3 is here in this workspace path. It's in my Google Drive folder, and because there's a space in the name and I can't change it, it caused some issues when I'm trying to build the converter. So everything that I worked on, I copied over a copy of the PA3 to my downloads folder, and I was working on it here, and then I copied over any changes to my actual workspace directory here. So that'll be what's in Perforce, but it's essentially the same thing. And then I also have a standalone folder which has the model converter exe, and this can be run in the command line based off a batch script that I wrote. But just showing the code here, I have the same standalone folder, and I have the model converter exe and then the same batch script. So I can run the batch script now, and this will essentially run the converter for each of the 5 models that I have in this same folder. I deleted a bunch of print statements from the converter, but I must have missed a few, which is why I'm getting this bad print statement output, but it doesn't affect the actual functionality. So here I have, and then I'll delete all the intermediate files. So I have the War Bear model, the Space Frigate, the Rabbit, the Buggy, and the Astro Boy, and then here are the 5 SPU files created. So I can go ahead and copy those over into my game engine code, which I have here. And then even though the SPU files and the TJ files exist, I'll paste the SPU files and it'll replace them. So as you can see, the SPU file has the updated time, and then the TGA files will be overwritten during the game engine, when the game engine is ran, which I'll show in a second. But yeah, these are the SPU files I just converted. And then jumping over to the game engine. So for the game engine, what we had to do was to load the models from the archiver, demo these 5 models, at least 2 instances and different transformations, rendering modes, several cameras, being able to move around, showing the bounding spheres. So I'll talk through some of this going in order. So loading the models from the archiver. So for example, this is the Astro Boy model class here. In game CBP, I instantiate the models up here, and as you can see, I pass in the SPU file names. So for example, for the Astro Boy model, I'll create pointers to the arrays for the verts and the try-index, and then I'll instantiate a pointer for the eat buffer, get the chunk size and the status. And what I did was I copied in the eat function into my engine, and that's what I used to extract a specific chunk type from the file name. So here I get the verts, I instantiate a vertex array, and then I copy over the data from eat buffer. I do the same thing for the tries. I do the same thing for the texture, and for the texture I open up the the TGA file. I write the data, and then I just add the TGA file to the texture manager, and then the rest of the data is loaded. One of the things I wasn't able to do is get multiple textures being able to be extracted in the model class. So for example, in Warbear, I included 2 textures into the SPU file, but it's only able to extract 1 right now. And the reason I had trouble with this is because I wasn't sure how to implement a system to check that a texture or a chunk has already been read in, and to make sure that I'm not reading in the same chunk twice, the same TGA file twice essentially. So that's something that I have to implement at a later date. What else? Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and run this demo showing that the models show up. I have the cameras set up, I include the sphere model, and then I also have bounding spheres for some of the objects, and I'll talk through what I did and some of the challenges. So yeah, I'll run it right now. So yeah, this is what I have, and so there's a lot going on. I'll try to describe it. So here's the bounding sphere, here's the polar bear model, here are the space frigates, here's Astro Boy, or this is Warbear, and then here Warbear as a wireframe with different shaders. Here's Rabbit, here's Astro Boy as a wireframe, here's Rabbit as a wireframe, here's the Buggy, and I included a cube. The bounding spheres are doing something weird here, I'll talk about that in a second, but And then I also included the camera model as well, which just includes the frustum wireframe. I think because of its size, it just has some rendering issues based on the distance, but for the most part, it shows up correctly. So yeah, I can zoom around, I can pan around these models, and they're animating. I have multiple instances of all of these. I can switch between different camera views. I can switch back, and this camera model is based off of this initial camera 1, and you can see that from my third camera position, that's the starting point for the camera 1 right there. I can zoom in and out. So here you can see the buggy, the cube, you can see the space frigates and the polar bear. Here's Astro Boy, here's Rabbit. And then I can swap between the textures. So yeah, another thing related to that texture is I haven't figured out how to give them some sort of hierarchy so that the polar bear or the war bear, for example, only switches between its 2 textures. Right now they still cycle between all of the textures that exist. So that's something to fix in the future as well. But I can cycle back through them and get to their original ones. Okay, so the bounding spheres. Here, the bounding sphere around the cube object, it's rendered and it's sized correctly. Here you can see that it's doing something weird, but for the most part it somewhat seems to be following the motion of the objects themselves. I realized that when objects are rotating, it does something to the bounding sphere radius and how it's rendered, or how it's like set up with the radius and the center, and I'm not sure what the issue is yet, and it only happens when an object is rotating. As you can see here, it doesn't happen with this cube since it's not rotating. But I was working heavily off of the included demo to have the bounding sphere working, and I realized that in the demo this issue came up as well, so it's just something that I'm going to have to fix in the future. But yeah, in terms of everything else, I have multiple instances working, and as I showed earlier, these are the SPU files that I copied in directly from the converter batch file execution. So yeah, just going through some of these things. Yeah, in the code, all of my model data is loaded from that single SPU file. Yeah, and one other thing that I wasn't able to do, but I imagine won't be that hard, is just being able to turn on and off the bounding spheres. But again, with this issue that keeps coming up, I wasn't able to get to it just yet. Yeah, so this is my demo. Obviously there's still a lot of progress to be made. There's a lot of things to be cleaned up in the code as well, but I'm excited to keep making progress and to get this working even further. So yeah, thanks for watching.